It is February the 19th, 2023.
This is As the World Burns, tying polls, prediction markets, and forecasting into current affairs and news. I'm your host, Randall Burns.
Today we're talking about Congress and the pandemic. I recently tweeted a link to some figures on congressional incidents of COVID-19, and it had a very good reception, so I thought I'd expand on it here. Now, here are the actual case reports for the House, both isolations and positive tests. Here they are for the Senate. And this was kind of a thing on this page until Biden announced the pandemic is over. So far, one member of Congress has died with the cause of death listed as COVID-19. Another one, Don Young, probably had his death accelerated by COVID-19, but he didn't die until about 18 months after infection. He had officially recovered, but then he did pass away. September 19th, 2022, President Biden announces the pandemic is over. This was a political decision, and a little bit we'll go over some of the advice and where it came from. Soon thereafter, about 40% of Americans agreed the pandemic is over, according to this Gallup poll. The prime mover in the announcement seems to have been a research firm called Impact Research that advised candidates how to win elections. They do not have forecasting expertise or public health expertise. They are purely a political advisory firm. Members of Congress are not an especially healthy lot. This link basically suggests their life expectancy is a little bit lower than the average American. This source looks at senators and their life expectancy compared to other white males. I think that's probably a bit of a mistake because you really want to also adjust it for class. Members of Congress tend to come from the more affluent segment of society. Many are attorneys. You need to adjust it by peer group, in my opinion. Another important data point is that members of Congress have a high rate of substance abuse compared to the general population. I haven't seen a good source on the link of this and COVID-19 yet, but it may turn out to be relevant, and so I'm just mentioning it here. Now, at the time this shift was made, U.S. life expectancy had been falling, according to the official figure. Deaths from COVID-19 directly are decreasing, but we won't have the life expectancy figures for 2022 for a while now. In the meantime, we have a metaculus projection, which basically shows a flat projection from 2021. So it's safe to assume that 2022 will be flat or decreasing. I personally think this forecast may be a bit optimistic. We'll go into some of the reasons in a bit. You will notice that recently there have been a lot of members of Congress masking, and they are kind of taking this message to heart. I think one of the reasons has to do with a phenomenon called Ash conformity, and there's a lot of pressure to conform for members of Congress. With Ash conformity, people will adapt to a statement that they know is wrong, because of peer pressure. Links included in the below. The actual job description of a member of Congress is largely that of raising funds. That's what they spend much of their time doing. And they really don't have a lot of individual latitude with what they do for the most part. There's a few exceptions, like the Kennedys and John Kerry, who are independently wealthy. Now, early in the pandemic, many of us on Metaculus doing forecasting thought it would be more of an issue. Turned out not to be. Here's a copy of the projection that we did then. There are reasons to think this may become more of an issue in the not so distant future. If you look at the past example of the COVID case that we reported, there's plenty of room for repeat infections in a complex social environment like we have in the US Congress bill. The work of T-cell immunologist A.J. Leonardi suggests that these reinfections could be absolutely devastating. There are mainstream immunologists that are describing the effect as somewhere between a common cold and HIV. But that's a little misleading because the more reinfections, the greater the risk. This is not quite mainstream yet, but it's getting there pretty fast. There is also the possibility of opportunistic infections following in the footsteps of COVID-19. One recent candidate has been H5N1 or bird flu. That's an emerging issue, and there'll be more on this one on my more on this type of threat on my page in the coming weeks. The type of safety protocol that I would recommend was exhibited recently at the World Economic Forum at Davos. I don't see the US Congress doing anything like this anytime soon. A lot of members of Congress are trying to appeal to anti-science voters. Rand Paul, for example, has willfully not been vaccinated, and he insists that simply having been infected is enough. If the US runs into serious problems, the type of interest represented at the Davos conference are examples of who the US will have to negotiate to get a bailout. But I think this shows something of a bifurcation between global elites and US elites. The US Congress is not enabling members to do their work remotely. They are not as aggressive, I think, as even the UK House of Parliament about ventilation. I think it's likely that they are in for some real adjustment in the not so distant future. Thank you for joining me. Likes and comments are welcome. Suggestions for future episodes are especially welcome.